When it comes to a development studio making their first game, it is important to stick the landing as much as possible. Without having much of a pedigree, you want to make sure that you're at least moderately successful in order to develop further games with bigger budgets and a higher ambition. This brings us to Ember Lab's 2021 release, Kena, Bridge of Spirits. In this title, you play as the titular Kena, who is a spirit guide that helps lost souls cross over into the afterlife. She comes across several spirits, with her ultimate goal being to reach the sacred mountain shrine. It was later released on Steam in 2022 that included an anniversary update, which is what we will be reviewing here. Is it a great start for the studio, or does it leave a lot to be desired? Like many games, you start a new game and choose your difficulty. I chose the Spirit Guide difficulty, which appears to be the normal one. Let's just get this out of the way and the main reason why I wanted to review this game. The graphics are absolutely gorgeous and simply jaw-dropping. It has this Pixar-like look to it that I don't believe I've seen in many games before. At least not to this level. I've simply never been so blown away by a masterclass combination of graphical fidelity and art style. It's even more impressive knowing that this was not made with an AAA budget and still looks better than many of those games as well. This was made possible by the Unreal Engine 4, which I was a bit shocked to find out since I thought this was on UE5. If the developers can flex their graphical prowess this well on their first game, I am very intrigued on what else is in store for future titles. Normally, I would praise the inclusion of a photo mode, but in a game with such visual charm, it was definitely something that I honestly expected. Thankfully, Ember Labs did not disappoint, helping me take some awe-inspiring shots. Good on you, devs. The graphics are often praised here, and deservedly so. What I also believe deserves praise though is the audio design. The music features its own charm and beauty throughout the adventure, and the voice work is very well done. It's a great compliment to the visual design, making the game a treat for both the eyes and the ears. Unfortunately, graphics and the overall presentation are only one part of the game. The gameplay also needs to match the quality as well, or at least come close to it. The game harkens back to many 3D platformers of the PS2 era, mainly games such as Jak and Daxter, and a bit of Beyond Good and Evil in some parts. Sometimes the platforming challenges are pretty simple, while others involve using various abilities that you'll gain throughout the game. There are also a decent amount of puzzles throughout the game, but many unfortunately feel underwhelming. Some of them are pretty clever and deserve praise, while others just feel like padding to make your journey artificially longer. I would say part of this has to do with the jumping, which never feels all that great. Most of the time, you're given just enough space to make jumps. This ends up feeling more frustrating than anything else, as you'll constantly slip off the edge of a platform. The combat itself is basically a Souls-like without a stamina bar. The fact may be considered blasphemous and heresy to some, but Arborea was another title that had Souls-like combat without a stamina bar, and that game was pretty awesome. You have your combination of light attacks and heavy attacks to work with, as well as abilities you can unlock. At first, it feels fine, and the combat abilities featured can help with variation. Unfortunately, the combat gets far too repetitive far too quickly. With the staff being your main source of attack, you'll probably stick with either mashing the light attack button or using your strong attack depending on the enemy. For the combat abilities you can unlock, I found several of them to be very good, while others can just be ignored. The Rot Hammer is the first ability you should get, as well as the Rot Arrow once you get the bow. The problem I have is how messy it can all get remembering the order of button combinations. I cannot tell you how many times I've pulled back my bow, powered it with a Rot Arrow, then dodged out of the way of an attack just to realize that I lost my Rot Arrow and have to refill the meter again. It shows a lack of polish trying to mesh all these different mechanics together. Honestly, these issues really come to the forefront when facing bosses. The game has a horrible case of enemies warping to you with every strike. It's a pain against regular enemies, but becomes even more intolerable for some of these bosses. There's a sense that the developers wanted to have these epic Souls-like encounters, but the game's mechanics and lack of polish are at constant odds. It's hard to explain since visually it looks fantastic and smooth, but actually playing it feels quite stiff, especially since you can't counter out of moves like in other Souls-likes. Another selling point to the game are the little creatures known as the Rot. These little guys can be commanded to perform various actions such as moving objects, distracting enemies, clearing out corruption, and a ton more. Some are very easy to find, while others may take a bit of figuring out. Collecting enough of them will allow you to level up and learn new abilities. I find this and their usage to be an overall fine system, and I really have no complaints here. For For the narrative itself, I was very disappointed with what was on offer here. The game is all about helping spirits cross over into the afterlife, which is a very interesting topic with so many different directions to go. It's also a great opportunity to see how Kenna reacts to these events and how it affects her going forward. There are some good moments throughout, but it unfortunately drops the ball far too often. The game just feels generic and plays it safe with its concept. The music plays its heart out to get me emotionally invested many of the times, but I just end up not caring even though I want to deep down. I believe this ultimately comes down to the protagonist herself. I honestly hate saying this about characters because it's ultimately subjective, but Kenna is just plain freaking boring. Visually, her design is fine and complements the game quite nicely. Her animations during battle and movement are also great, and she's often pretty expressive on what is going on around her. Regardless, I have no idea what kind of person she is outside of being a kind person. She never really says anything interesting or memorable throughout, which is a shame since the game sets up several key points that don't really get addressed, at least not in the way that I hoped. I'm not saying she needs to be an ultra complex and deep character, but a bit of personality and development would have gone a long way. Thankfully, there are more interesting characters throughout, although many suffer from the same issue. Many are visually awesome, including the many bosses you'll face, but others come off as far too stoic for their own good. I believe a bit more humor for some of these characters would have helped these characters loosen up a bit. I get that you don't want to dilute the weight of the spirit's stories, but it would help to make the characters feel more human and relatable. The game length is also something that gets criticized, which is listed as 10 hours for howlongtobeat.com. If you ignore the trials and just focus on the main quest, to me, this is honestly to the game's benefits, as this game doesn't offer too much variation to keep me interested for much longer. Outside of the trials and trinkets that can be found in the world itself, there isn't much replay value given the linearity and structure of this game. That isn't necessarily a bad thing since it doesn't feel incomplete or anything like that, but just know what the developers were aiming for this one. Even though I haven't been too blown away by the gameplay here, I have a ton of respect for the developers for post-product support. This game is honestly complete and doesn't feel like there's missing content, so it just feels like a bonus for what they have provided. This includes new outfits, hats for your rot friends, and a few other little things here and there. There's also been post-launch support to help with bugs and glitches, which is always appreciated. Overall, I'm just a bit torn on my overall feelings. For the positives, the presentation in all areas is an achievement and deserves all the praise in the world. In fact, it should have won the Steam Award for the best art design or whatever it was called, but we'll talk about that another day. I also respect the fact that the devs have stayed active with patches and additional content. I just wish everything else was met with the same level of quality. The gameplay especially is just too repetitive and lacks polish with random difficulty spikes, repetitive combat, and tedious puzzles. The narrative is also surprisingly underwhelming with a disappointingly bland protagonist. At best, I can really only recommend this game at a discount, and even then I would temper my expectations. If there was a sequel or a follow-up of some kind, I would definitely be interested to see if the developers take it as an opportunity to improve on what's here. I really wanted to like this one, but I still do see a bright future for Ember Labs. Thank you guys for watching as always. Please like, share, and subscribe. And this is Powerhouse, signing off.